The yellow flag has been a staple in motorsports for decades as a sign of caution. Cars must slow down, follow a pace car around the track, etc. An opportunity to get changes done to the car, think of strategies with the team, and lots more. The procedure varies across many different forms of motorsports, and in NASCAR, despite seeming basic from an immediate standpoint, it's actually had a long history of controversial moments and many rule changes that have brought up a ton of compilations across YouTube, like the overtime line and quote-unquote failed green white checkered attempts. I personally find the procedure's history to be very interesting, and I believe it deserves recognition despite its bumpy road and negativity. Whether it's about NASCAR themselves or the drivers for something unexpected happening, any form of the caution period can turn a race into an absolute madhouse, changing reputations for years to come. Today, we take a look at the turbulent and controversial history of NASCAR's caution rules, including the number of times the procedure has seen change and was resulted from having different methods. To start off, let's keep the speeds down for the time being and discuss car service under caution. Meet pit road, where all the cars come in to get some modifications done, whether it's taking in some good old Sunoco fuel or collecting a fresh set of new Goodyear tires, whatever applies with a team's strategy. A pit cycle may seem very simple at first, but at one particular time for some reason, NASCAR felt like throwing a bunch of rules all over the place to make things interesting, at least in their eyes. At the 1991 Daytona 500, there were a bajillion rules that were revealed relating to both pit road and caution flag procedures for the 1991 season. To start off, there are two pace cars, one for leading the field around under caution, and one for leading those who choose to pit. Okay, that sounds alright, not a big deal. But then the pit road rules come up. Under caution, you can do anything except change tires. Now, you could argue the strategy factor in saying provide some fun, but I disagree on this one. Doesn't that rule technically mean if a car has a flat or a near flat tire under caution, they can't get a new one? Was there an exception to that? But oh man, just wait until you hear these rules. Each car was designated odd or even based on where they had qualified for the race, with the odd cars getting a blue sticker and the even cars getting an orange sticker. After the caution was dropped and a restart occurred, only the odd cars can come and pit on the second green flag lap, while only the even cars do their process on the third lap, and every other lap, anyone can pit. Okay, whoa, what? Why is that so complicated? It gets even worse. If you change tires under the caution flag or pit with the wrong group, you earn a 1 lap penalty, while it's 15 seconds for overshooting your pit stall or having a crew member go over far too soon. My brain has already exploded if you're curious. Now, why these rules were made came from a fair standpoint: safety. In previous years, there were basically not that many restrictions with pit stops. You could go as fast as you want, it didn't matter. However, that was completely changed in 1990 as a slew of incidents caused many people to question the safety of pit stops. At the Die Hard 500 at Talladega, Stanley Smith lost control of his car and crashed into Tracy Leslie, hurting some crew members although no one was seriously injured. At the Atlanta Journal 500 season finale, Ricky Rudd locked the brakes up and crashed into Bill Elliott, which would tragically kill a member by the name of Mike Rich. With that situation being the nail in the coffin, literally, NASCAR did their job in implementing some changes. However, by race 9 at Bristol, many complaints were stirring over the procedure, and changes were made allowing tires to be modified under caution, but keeping the stickers. The stickers were removed by the next race, and what was implemented is what we still have to this day: a pit speed limit. Why NASCAR wouldn't just do that one simple rule at the very beginning of all this complicated bullcrap is a little absurd. Speaking of absurd, let's advance in time to the 2009 NASCAR Camping World Truck Series season, where many fans were questioning between common sense and safety. Being revealed at Daytona, a few rule changes were made towards pit stops. Only 12 crew members are allowed at each race, while only 5 can go over the wall for a stop to do changes. That one sounds alright, and nowadays remains the same: a fuel man, a jackman who is also a tire carrier, another tire carrier, and 2 tire changers, with the exception of another person who does the windshield tear-off. With the next gen, aka Gen 7 car now operating, however, things may get a little complicated because of the swap from 5 lug nuts to just 1 on each tire, like Formula 1. And the recent Daytona 500 actually put on an early show when it came to tires. Anyways, it gets a little strange from there. Fuel or tire changes are allowed, but you can't do both on the same pit stop. That one has seen a couple of changes throughout the years both before and after 2009, and personally I don't understand that one a whole lot, although it can make up for good strategy. Those other 2 rules involving an unsealed engine seals I'm not an expert on, so you can judge that however you want. Most people have said these changes in particular are likely to reduce costs, which is reasonable, but man, NASCAR just loves to confuse their fans sometimes. Getting into more of the race side of things, pretty much all the time during NASCAR's first couple of eras, the way the procedure would go was by letting the cars race back to the line and then getting it underway. Even if there was a huge wreck, either people would just wing it and hope to see an open racetrack ahead of them, or slow the heck down and hope no one slams into them. That's the way it was. Because of it, the safety aspect was a serious issue, as injuries and even fatalities were possible. There were many times where these kinds of scenarios occurred. At the 1983 Daytona 500, the caution was displayed for a blown-up Dale Earnhardt on lap 64, and as the field was coming around to get the yellow flag, off of turn 4, leader Dick Brooks for some reason slowed down, and as the lap car's lake speed swung around him on the inside, Brooks had to slam on the brakes once more, which caused Darrell Waltrip to swerve to the left. sending his car into the inside wall. The car then deflected back onto the track and he nearly collected eventual race winner Cale Yarborough. This led to much criticism from the commentary booth. About 7 years later, an ARCA race at Daytona had itself a horrific incident. In a race that was an absolute wreckfest altogether, I mean it's ARCA during the 1990s, what do you expect? One of the wrecks saw Slick Johnson gain severe skull and chest injuries. But what happened next made things even worse. Getting the all clear to go and assist him despite the fact that the field still had to come around to take the yellow flag, an ambulance carrying paramedic Mike Stolley stopped by the car as the field drove by. With the worst of luck, as one of the packs slowed down while Stolley was standing right beside the car, one car in particular didn't slow down well enough, and Bob Kozlowski ended up spinning into both Johnson's car and Stolley. Even though part of Stolley's body was lying under Johnson's car and suffering burns from the exhaust, he managed to survive with a broken forearm and leg. Tragically, Johnson passed away from his injuries just a few days later. A more slightly recent and probably more well-known moment of this scenario happened in 2003 at the Sylvania 300 in New Hampshire Motor Speedway. Just past the halfway point, Dale Jarrett was wrecked off of turn 4, and as his car sat alone on the middle of the front stretch, the entire field had to come back around to take the caution flag. It didn't help that multiple battles were taking place up towards the front, and many cars came pretty close to sideswiping Jarrett. This moment, plus 2 other controversies during the same year at Texas and Sonoma involving conflicts with passing under the caution and drivers intentionally letting lap cars get back on the lead lap, was what led towards the rule being changed, as NASCAR later mandated that the field would be frozen at the moment of caution, along with making a lucky dog rule for lap cars. Despite it being a good rule change, that didn't stop it from continuing to cause controversy in later years, including multiple moments where NASCAR didn't bother to throw the caution on the last lap of some races, even if a wreck was ensuing somewhere on the racetrack. Many of these most notable moments include the 2007 Daytona 500, where a final lap wreck coming off of turn 4 that didn't cut a caution caused Mark Martin to lose the race to Kevin Harvick in a wild photo finish. Both 2013 Daytona races, where the first one had a wreck in turn 1 and the second one had 2 wrecks on the same lap, with both races being won by Jimmy Johnson. And also both 2020 Daytona races with, Ryan Newman's, Speaking of the last lap, many races in history have seen incredibly high altitude finishes where either the race ended on a caution, with no opportunity to get back to racing, or multiple attempts were allowed, but sometimes got so poorly executed that NASCAR had to shove things under the rug in order to keep things civil. Twitter. Introducing the good old green-white checkered rule. The way NASCAR used to use their yellow flag procedures towards the end of their races was by simply letting it end. Quite literally, if a caution came out with 3 laps remaining, there would be no shot at finishing the race under green. Why? Because they refused to go over the original race distance. That may sound reasonable from a certain perspective, but when thinking about the fans, it was in every form a piss-off. Why would a fan want to come to a race and end up watching the car slowly be taken to the checkered flag at pace car speed? That's not what they intended to watch, although it's obviously not under their control. The only race before the 2000s that allowed for laps not counting under caution towards the end was the All-Star race, which was called the Winston back then. It's funny how they let that slide for an exhibition race but not an actual point race. The only potential solution during those times was NASCAR displaying a very quick red flag to halt the cars just before the checkered flag. Not even kidding, if there were maybe 3 laps remaining in a race, NASCAR could simply drop a red flag in order to give enough time for another restart. At first, only short tracks had this rule, but it quickly spread to pretty much every single race. Of course, its one main flaw was its inconsistency. At the 2002 Summer Daytona race, a caution with 4 laps to go had most fans hoping for a quick red flag and an eventual restart, which was fairly reasonable to expect. However, NASCAR chose to end the race, and the fans let them know what they thought as Michael Waltrip went on to celebrate his victory. NASCAR cited past incidents that happened in this kind of scenario as an excuse, including Rusty Wallace's 1993 crash and a wreck in the 1997 Daytona Summer race where Mark Martin was injured in a 1-lap shootout. What ended up being the nail in the coffin for this rule was the memorable finish to the 2004 Aaron's 499 at Talladega. Most people will likely remember that it was a fight for the win between NASCAR's most popular driver Dale Earnhardt Jr. and arguably NASCAR's best driver at the time, Jeff Gordon. As the field was coming through turns 3 and 4 with 5 laps remaining, Jr. looked to make a pass on the outside for the lead. Behind the lead cars was a spin by Brian Vickers, who surprisingly didn't collect anyone else, but a caution was thrown. Of course, many of the fans were expecting to hear that Jr.'s pass had won him the race, and he was the leader at the moment of caution. But that was the complete opposite of what happened next. Even though none of the cameras could catch a perfect glimpse of who was actually in front, NASCAR gave the win to Gordon, thus the fans began to throw beer cans onto the track. With all these controversies piled up outside NASCAR's headquarters, the green-white checkered rule was born at the beginning of that year's summer. To make things even funnier or perhaps worse, even making that rule would never cost an absolutely perfect finish ever. When the rule was first implemented, only 1 attempt was permitted. There weren't exactly any controversial finishes with the 1 attempt part of the rule, and it remained relatively stable until the 2010 season, which is when the 3 attempt rule came along. Ever since that year, there have been a crazy number of green-white checkered finishes that have resulted in major controversy, although it wasn't exactly the green-white checkered rule itself that was at the central point of these controversies, rather it was things such as the yellow line rule and the overtime line. We'll be getting to the latter later, so stay tuned. There was one time, however, where the green light checker rule did play into what can only be described as possibly the worst finish in NASCAR history, or in more specific terms, the most poorly executed finish in NASCAR history. Ironically enough, it was during what was arguably NASCAR's worst year in the modern era, being the 2015 season, which had controversy written all over it. What led to it was an incident that summer's Daytona Cup race, as Dale Earnhardt Jr. went on to score his 25th career Cup Series win and his 4th all-time points win at Daytona. However, as the pack went to take the checkered flag, Denny Hamlin was sent spinning around by Kevin Harvick in front of the whole pack, and one little tap against Austin Dillon's car caused Dillon to violate all laws of physics, and he soared into the catch fence at a horrifying speed. He walked away under his own power, and because of the incident, NASCAR decided to reduce the number of green light checkered attempts back to 1 for the fall Talladega playoff race. In hindsight, this would turn out to be one of NASCAR's worst decisions ever, despite the understandable safety concerns. When Talladega arrived for the second time that year, it looked to be an ending where either Dale Jr. could successfully conquer his must-win situation and advance into the next round, or Joey Logano would win every race in the current round and continue to laugh at Matt Kenseth. However, with a caution being displayed at 5 laps remaining, the field racked up for what was looking to be a wild dash to the finish. As everyone came through the trial oval to take the green flag, Jimmy Johnson was suddenly spun by Kyle Larson, and the two cars went to the grass. NASCAR throws a caution, and technically speaking, it appears Joey Logano has won the race. But NASCAR does something. They say the field never made to the green flag, and based on camera angles, it appears the lights did come on, along with the yellow flag being waved, just before anyone had crossed the line. Despite Logano protesting on his radio, another attempt was done, and literally everything fell to shreds. Kevin Harvick, who had the awful luck of losing power just as the field was coming back around, needed a way to keep himself in the playoffs, because losing spots on that pending restart would likely take him out. So what is he going to do?
The 4 not going. They wreck behind him. The green flag is out as they cross the start-finish line. Will they throw the caution? Trying to get back up to speed. Caution comes out. Now the question is, who was in front?
Stay in front of them. Stay in front of them.
You heard him say stay in front of them. NASCAR will go back and watch video. They will look at the scoring loops to determine the finishing order.
As Trevor Bayne tries to pass by on the outside, he dumps him, and a ton of other cars go spinning all over the place. After a few seconds, NASCAR throws the caution as the cars are going through turn 1. Now, when it was thrown, it looked like Dale Jr. was the winner based on the TV graphics way of saying caution. But nope, the lights had apparently turned on when Logano was in front. Therefore, Jr. was eliminated, Harvick was moving on without a penalty, and yes, he wasn't even penalized for any of that, and Logano had won every race that round. The fans were absolutely livid, and many still are to this day. The year as a whole was controversial, and that race is usually considered the central point of NASCAR losing control over a race, and having its reputation thrown to the abyss, all because of an unnecessary green-white checkered rule change. Things toned down in terms of hate in 2016, but the controversy didn't stop. Beginning that year was an addition to the green-white checkered rule, which to confirm was returned back to 3 attempts after that awful Talladega finish. Introducing the overtime line, placed around the halfway point of the track or just beyond it. If the field did make it back to the line, then well crap, gotta do another restart. If the field does make it over the line, then the race is over with the next caution flag. The argument here seemed to be that NASCAR wanted races to end quicker if there was a crash, especially if the track was massive like Daytona or Talladega. What made the rule become so inconsistent was NASCAR's failure to properly execute a finish with that line, and just the overall fact that the line was like a cheat code for the officials to create unnecessary delays. There are so many examples of these, and considering it was just a 2-year tenure, its resume is hilarious to look back on. Both the 2016 and 2017 Summer Daytona races in the Xfinity Series had somewhat different endings, but both caused much controversy. In 2016, the field began crashing on the backstretch on the last lap, and about 4 to 5 cars were ready to make it back to the line for a potential photo finish. But with about a quarter of a mile remaining, NASCAR threw the yellow flag. Why they would wait either that long to throw it or why they would throw it at that exact point was just unfathomable. We were that short a possible history for a finish. Just wait until I discuss 2017 though. The next year the race had been postponed to Saturday afternoon due to rain and even had another delay which lasted about 3 hours long, so that didn't help what was to come next. The big one would come with 2 laps remaining on a late restart, and so an overtime restart was needed. William Byron led the field back to green, and on the backstretch the middle of the pack began to wreck. NASCAR has maybe 2 to 3 seconds to display another caution, but nope, they wait until the cars are almost in turn 3 to put it out. They could have easily flipped the switch in an instant, or perhaps let the field come back around with the hope of all the wrecked cars being out of the way just in time. Just one of the many poor examples of the line. Many more races during the short-lived overtime line era continue to have useless finishes, and sometimes the line wasn't even the main cause. The 2016 spring race at Atlanta, NASCAR waits until after the white flag to throw a caution, which actually wasn't the issue. It was their determination of who finished second. Instead of using the moment of caution, they used the start-finish line to place Dale Jr. in second instead of Kyle Busch. Very wrong decision, but honestly it was probably very popular with the fans. The 2016 Spring Talladega race for the Xfinity Series. There's a crash in the tri oval with a couple of feet left before the start-finish line, and Brendan Poole crosses the line first in a photo finish. But his win gets stripped away because NASCAR threw the caution, and Elliott Sadler is the quote-unquote real winner. 2017 Brickyard 400 in Indianapolis, a race that went way longer than it should have. A crash happens in the back on the very last of many late restarts, and NASCAR waits until the cars have passed the line to virtually end the race. To be fair, darkness was on the horizon and Indy didn't have lights and still doesn't, and you can't forget how much of a damn wreckfest the ending was becoming. Personally, I consider it an exception, but still it wasn't really done well, to be kind of honest. And finally, the 2017 Summer Texas race for the Truck Series, where a caution is thrown just after the start-finish line due to Timothy Peters flipping at a turn 4. What was controversial about this? NASCAR's choice to use the start-finish line to determine the winner rather than the moment of caution. In a nutshell, Chase Briscoe lost his chance at a first career series victory because of that, and Christopher Bell was handed the checkered flag. That right there is pretty much what set fans on fire, and by August, the overtime line was finally abolished, with the green-white checkered, or overtime, rule being returned back to normal, only this time with unlimited attempts instead of 3, which remains a rule today. Good riddance. Hilariously enough, speaking of the Truck Series, that series alone had a rule formed before the 2016 season known as the infamous caution clock. Honestly, this one rule has gotten itself a fair share of videos because of how needlessly laughable it was. Pretty simple, a 20-minute clock that puts out automatic cautions every time it ends, with a reset each of those times. In the final 20 laps of a race, the clock would be removed. NASCAR's perspective was to implement more strategies within each of the teams and give more of an opportunity for younger, newer drivers and teams to have time to adjust their truck. But come on, man. In reality, it pissed the hell out of many fans and wasted a bunch of time every race, and it had a dumb purpose in trying to attempt better racing. Competition cautions have a reason for why they get put into races, and adding on with a bunch of extra ones makes no sense and doesn't provide any lessons for youngsters/newgoers. Any opportunity of a fuel mileage race or bonus points was completely thrown out the window, and eventually the rule was removed prior to the 2017 season. Once again, good riddance. And of course, stages. Don't get me started on those because the fact that pretty much every race has at least 2 mandatory cautions is just sad. Is it not that hard just to give them the points and still let them race like old times? Perhaps you can answer that down in the comments below. So there it is, NASCAR's history of altering the rulebook for a flag colored yellow. If you enjoyed that, consider subscribing and giving this a thumbs up. My name's Reegser, or Reeks for short, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.